Well, good morning, church. Good to see you guys. I'll be honest, I don't know that I'm fully qualified for this series, as I only know about half of those TV shows. But I'm a huge Gilligan's Island and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fan, if that counts for anything right there. 90s babies all the way. Awesome. Well, good morning, church. So excited to be here with you guys. I have the chance to kind of dive into this series with you while Pastor Brian is out in Alaska serving with our team up there. Also, this week, we had an awesome week at Summer Jam. If you were a volunteer at Summer Jam, can you raise your hand real quick? We just want to thank and honor you guys. If you'll just join me in thanking, absolutely. We had over 100 kids that were there at Summer Jam, was last I heard. An amazing 4 days getting to teach the gospel to these kids. Had a number of kids actually get saved. It was really cool to see that. To see them interacting and learning through story times, through their discovery times, the games they got to play. Amazing, amazing week. And if we've been highlighting every week these opportunities to serve, and if you have a heart for serving, you're interested in any way, believe me, we have a ton of opportunities for you to do that, and we would love to get to be a partner with you in your story. But guys, I'm excited. We are in this series called Old School, a look at the Old Testament, which I'll be honest, if you'd asked me about 6 years ago, I'd have been like, this is the lamest series in the world. Ain't nobody want to read the Old Testament, okay? These and thous and rules and rules and rules and battle, but then more rules. I'm a dude, in case you can't tell. When it gets to Joshua and David, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. How many did he kill? Let's read that part again. But I promise there's a lot more than death and bloodshed in the Old Testament. When I was away at Georgia, I was really diving into my faith, and I actually fell more in love with the Old Testament than I did with the New Testament. It sounds super heretical. The whole Bible points to Jesus, though. But I really did fall in love with the Old Testament as we saw this kind of deep character of who this creative God was. And so I'm very excited to get the chance to come before you and to dive in with you. And what we've been doing through this series so far, since the second week, is we're looking kind of at Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, and these characters that are highlighted by the author of Hebrews as being kind of examples of the faith. They're not perfect, they're flawed horribly, and we'll see that in today's character, just like you and me, but they demonstrate some amazing godly characteristics. And so I just want to read, this is kind of our theme verse for the series, and it's in Hebrews 12. It says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." And last week, Pastor Brian did a phenomenal job helping us kind of key in on that therefore. Every time we see a therefore in the Bible, we have to ask, what is the therefore? And the reason that it's there is the author of Hebrews is pointing back to the previous chapter, which is that chapter, the Hall of Faith. He's pointing back to all these characters throughout history that have done amazing things and been faithful to the Lord. And he's saying, therefore, since we have seen their faithfulness and we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, okay, these believers who have gone before us, because of that, let's continue on faithfully. And so last week we looked at Abraham and we saw Abraham's obedience, and Abraham's story is amazing. I hope that I can be as obedient as Abraham, that if God came and said, hey, I want you to go to a place that I'm going to tell you about. Like, wait, what? Like, I'm not going to tell you where it is now. I just need you every day to get up and go till I tell you to stop. Like, that's what I want you to do. And eventually you'll get there. And you won't know that you get there until I tell you that you're there. Like, I hope I'm obedient enough to go like, absolutely, cool, let's do this, God. But we looked at his obedience. I saw obedience is not a means to God's blessing, but it's a response to his grace. We obey not so that we get something. We obey because we've already gotten all of it. That's why. And so today we're going to jump right in and look at our next character, and that is the man named Jacob. Jacob, Abraham's grandson. And Jacob is not the prettiest character in the Bible by any means. He was a deceiver. His name literally means one who grasps. Grasping at the heel of Esau. From the very beginning, he was kind of clinging to his brother and trying to take what was his brother's. But what's really cool is we're going to look at the faithfulness of Jacob, which is not always something that we think of when we read Jacob's story. But in Hebrews 11, in that Hall of Faith, we have this verse right here that talks about Jacob, and it says this in verse 21, "By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff." And we see that at the very end of Jacob's story, as his story is coming to a close, he knows his time is up, he is dying. What does he do in his final moments is he worships. And this phrase right here, bowing over the head of his staff, is a really interesting phrase. We're going to come back to that at the very end of this message. But what we see is that Jacob's life, over everything that he's been through, it concludes with this moment of worshiping God. And it's a really kind of a beautiful, beautiful moment there. And as we're going into this, because we're going to be talking about faithfulness today, that's kind of the trait that we're highlighting. Faithfulness and obedience go hand in hand, but there is a difference between those two. As I was kind of reading through this, I was like, man, I really feel like sometimes talking about faithfulness, we're almost talking about obedience. And I want to make a distinction there. Obedience is an action, okay? When mom says, take out the trash, you do it or you die. Action, reaction. Simple, okay? Obedience is an action. Faithfulness is a conviction. Faithfulness is an inherent deep belief in something that will then lead to obedience. Because I believe my mom is terrified and is not afraid to kill me, I will obey her when she says take out the trash. Because I believe that my God is a good God, I will listen to what he says, even when it's difficult. You know, as I've grown in my faith and gotten to hang out with people and met people all over, I've learned that something that is constant with every human being is a desire for purpose. I have yet to meet anyone, whether they're meeting that purpose, failing at it, their story is terrible, their story is amazing. I have yet to meet anyone that says, I really hope my life has no meaning, no purpose. I just want to, get through today. Do I think that we go through seasons where we're like, I just want to get through today? Absolutely. But I think that over the span of our life, there is this banner saying, I really hope that my life is significant. And as I was wrestling with that in my own life, I had this desire to be useful. I think that's what my purpose came down to. I was like, God, I really just want to be useful. Whatever that looks like. I want to be useful for the gospel. I want to be useful with teens. I want to be useful in serving. I just want to be useful. And a few years ago, God started laying on my heart, and I've talked about this in other messages, that before I am useful, I need to be obedient. That God was telling me, Foster, I get that you want to be useful, but be more concerned with being obedient. And out of that obedience, I'll bring you some usefulness. I can use you. And as I was studying through this, I really felt God was kind of convicting me. He was like, Foster, I'm gonna show you a new one now. It goes even further than that. Before you're even concerned with obedience, just be faithful. Not that you get a pass on obedience because we're not faithful. Like, well, I'm working on my faithfulness, so I don't have to be obedient right now. It's okay for me to murder because I'm still working on this step. Baby steps, guys. No, but God was saying, this is absolutely what I want you to do and to be useful. But Foster, I also want you to start right here. To take me at my word, because that's what we're going to be looking at with Jacob's faithfulness, that Jacob took God at his word, regardless of what it looked like. And so we're going to go ahead and dive into the story of Jacob. We'll be kind of running through Genesis. I don't have a whole lot of notes for you if you're a note taker, but we'll be looking at a lot of scripture passages if you want to jot those down. But as we look at Jacob's story, what we see here is Jacob actually has one of the most tragic stories of the whole Bible. From the very beginning, his is a sad story. And now granted, the only perfect human being, the only perfect person in the Bible is Jesus, okay? And even his story is pretty tragic. I mean, if we really get down to it, he loved the people that he created and came to die for him. They rejected him so much that they murdered him on a cross. That's tragic. But as I was reading through this, it really struck me. I was like, Jacob's story is terrible right from the get-go. And it never really gets better. There's not really even there's kind of a happy ending, but it's really not that great happy ending like a Disney credit kind of roll. But Jacob's story starts like this. You see, he's born second. He's got a twin brother named Esau. And as they come through the womb, Esau comes first, and we see that Jacob is literally holding onto his heel, which I've never seen that happen before. And maybe you're a doctor, and you can be like, yeah, that happens like every fifth pregnancy, Foster. That's totally normal. But Jacob comes into the world holding onto his brother's heel. And they make a big point of that. His name, Jacob, actually means one who grasps. He is grasping at his brother as if he is trying to hold on and catch up and maybe pull back his brother and get what his brother had. Now, the reason that this is important for Jacob is because in ancient cultures, birth order played a lot into the rest of your life. You see, when a patriarch or a father would die, okay, because this is a patriarchal society, so it tends to follow the male headship of the family. When the father would die, whatever the father had was dispersed amongst his children, whether they were adopted, whether they were born, however. But the one caveat was this: the firstborn son got a double share. So there's two kids, Jacob and Esau. That means that Esau, being the firstborn, gets 2/3 of all the wealth of Isaac. Jacob gets 1/3. Esau gets the first choice of the family land, the family business, all this stuff, just because he was born literally seconds before his brother. So right from the get-go, Jacob is set up to receive less through no choice of his own, nothing that he did. But it keeps going. We see from that moment on, Jacob is constantly trying to get what is his brother's, to almost kind of prove his worth. I'm a second born. I'm also a middle child, which I think is the best place to be. I'm going to be honest with you. And, I hear all these stories about firstborn syndrome and middle child syndrome and third child and fourth. And if you're one of those families, you've got like a 14th child syndrome. That's really cool. But you hear about all this, and I do think that birth order does affect the kid. I think there's a lot more to it than that, but I do think that the way that you're born, the order that you're born, and your relation with your siblings plays a lot into you. And so we have Jacob. He is technically the second born, and we see all throughout his story, he's not his dad's favorite. So we see very clearly that Jacob is actually treated differently from Esau, who's given preferential treatment by his dad. Now, Jacob's mom kind of fills that void and kind of plays favorites with him. But so we see that there's not a very good family dynamic here. And Jacob, throughout his early life, and we know this story, does everything he can to get his brothers. He cheats his brother Esau out of his birthright, basically. Esau comes in, he's a hunter, and he's making a big deal. He's very extra. I'm going to die. I'm so hungry. Just give me a pumpkin spice latte, brother. And Jacob says, hey, I've been making this stew. I'll give it to you, but here's the catch. You have to give me your birthright. Birthright meaning I get the 2/3 of the inheritance. And Esau says, you know what? Because I'm so hungry, absolutely. And immediately regrets it. And it says so much so that he despises his birthright. And so now Jacob is not only not his father's favorite, he is no longer even favored by his brother. His brother despises him the rest of his life. And so it goes on. Jacob ends up deceiving his dad and getting a blessing because as the father would pass, he would bestow a blessing on his children. And typically the firstborn got a bigger blessing. And so Jacob kind of sneaks in. He puts goat skin with hair on his arms because Esau's a hairy man. And he comes in and deceives his father and gets his brother's blessing as well. And so right now, Jacob's standing there and his whole family kind of despises him. That's basically where he's at from the get-go. And Jacob ends up being forced to leave his home and his family. We find this in Genesis chapter 27. And so he's leaving, he's fleeing for his life because his brother's so angry now. His brother has decided, guess what? I'm going to kill my only brother. Perfectly content with it. There's no remorse, there's no hesitation. I am going to murder my brother because of the way that he's treated me. And so Jacob's mom says, hey, I love you. We need to get you out of here. You need to go. And she convinces Isaac to help her. We need to kind of create this story. He needs to get a wife from somewhere else. And so his dad comes and says, hey, we want you to go to another town ways away. We got family there. Go and find a wife there. And so Jacob sets off, and we don't notice this at the time. And as we read Jacob's story, we don't actually see direct indicators that paints this for us. But the reality is, from this moment forth, when Jacob leaves his family, he will never again see his parents. His mom and dad die without him getting to be there. Now, he does have somewhat of a good relationship with his mom, and he never gets to see her again because of the consequences of his actions up to this point. He has to flee for his life. He's exiled from his family. And from that moment on, he will never again see his parents. Now, that's a pretty sad thought. He sees his brother again, not under the best circumstances, but not under terrible circumstances. We don't see they get very close. But he never gets to see his parents. And so we see right from the start of his story, because this really is the start of his story, Jacob does not have this pretty life. And so Jacob sets out because he's leaving, he's going to find a wife, and he has his first encounter with God. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because up to this point, we see no record of Jacob really being interested in God. Now, he's probably heard the stories because Abraham was so close with God, and then his son Isaac would have been there, and Jacob probably would have met his grandfather Abraham a little bit in his early years, so he would have heard the stories, he would know a little bit, but we don't see any direct indication that Jacob ever interacted with God. There was no moment where he stood there and talked with them. There was no miraculous sign. And so Jacob sets out, and we have this moment where he is walking in the wilderness. He lays down to sleep. He pulls a rock in as a pillow, which I'm no camper, but I don't even think that's a good idea. But he pulls a rock in as a pillow, and while he's sleeping, he has this dream. And he sees this ladder. This is where we get the phrase Jacob's ladder. He sees this ladder with angels ascending and descending back and forth from heaven. At the top of the ladder is the Lord. And the Lord looks down at him and he makes a promise to Jacob in this dream, very similar to the promise he made to Abraham. That's what we see in Genesis 28. The Lord says, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. This promise that God would be with Jacob, that he would bless Jacob, that he would lead Jacob. Very, very similar to the promise given to Abraham. Here's the neat thing, though, because we haven't seen a lot of good things about Jacob, is that Jacob, in the next couple verses, seems to immediately take God at his word. Which is interesting, because in Abraham's story, we actually see many times where Abraham asked for some kind of validation. Well, how do I know these things will be true, that I'm going to have a son? And God has to kind of provide something. Jacob literally wakes up from his dream and says, this is surely the Lord's place. If the Lord will do to me as he has said, I will make the Lord my God all the days of my life. No hesitation. Which is mind-blowing, because if we look at what Jacob is going on, he's not going on very much. He literally saw the Lord in a dream. Not a vision while he was awake. No burning bush, no cloud, no pillar of fire, nothing miraculous. He went to sleep, had a crazy dream, and woke up and said, that must be the Lord. Now, I talk to Andy all the time about this, and I thought this was normal until a few years ago and realized it's not. I dream every night, and I remember my dreams every morning, and I can remember most of them. And I found out years ago that most people don't dream every night, or they don't remember their dreams. But I dream every night, and so I can kind of picture this. I'm like, okay, so let's say I wake up this morning, and I had this crazy dream of these spiritual beings going up and down a ladder, and I wake up, I'm just instantly like, this is the Lord. That's who it is. You know what? I'm leaving Claremont. I'm moving to Montana because of that dream last night. Like everyone in my life would say, Foster, that is absolutely ridiculous. You had a dream. You ate something weird. That's what it was. But Jacob's response is this dream, which I think this is beautiful because as I was reading through this and thinking about it, I started asking myself, I was like, how much does it actually take for me to trust God? How often am I more like Gideon when God says, Foster, I have this beautiful plan that I'm working for your life. I'm like, all right, God. Let me break out my fleece for you real quick because we haven't done this in a while. God, if you'll make the fleece wet but the ground dry, then I will trust you. As opposed to this man Jacob who wakes up from a dream and says, you know what, I truly do believe that was God. And so because that was enough, I'm going to fully take God at his word. And while Jacob's story is tragic and Jacob is not a great individual, he lies and deceives most of his life, what we do see throughout his life is that he holds to this commitment to God his entire life. There's never a point that he wavers in it. He has a simple dream. He wakes up and says, absolutely, this must be my God. I will follow my God for the rest of the days of my life. That's it. And so his life goes on. I'm going to speed through some of this. He goes and he works for his wives. I say wives because he gets cheated out of it. And it's kind of a funny play on words and on the situation because he is a deceiver and he gets deceived as he's trying to get his wife. So he meets this man named Laban and he says, hey, I'll work for you for your daughter right there. I will do whatever it takes. And we're like, man, that's such a beautiful story until he gets her sister. And we're like, oh, what is this? But he works for 7 years and he gets her sister and he wakes up the next day and he's like, this isn't who I wanted. And Laban's like, well, tell you what, how about, let's do it again. 7 years, I'll give you her, you can have her, and you're good to go. Jacob actually works for Laban for 20 years. 20 years to get his brides. And during that time, as far as we can tell, Isaac and Rebecca have passed. During this time is when they would have more than likely passed away, and so he never sees them. He's with his family. He starts to build a family. Things start to take an upward turn, so much so that he's amassing great wealth from Laban. He's getting flocks. He's getting servants. He's having kids. And finally, he decides to sit out from Laban's land to establish himself. And as Jacob is traveling, he realizes that his brother, the one that had started all this, really he had started it, but the one who had been the reason he had to leave is coming his way. And so we know this story. Jacob gets very nervous and he starts sending gifts to his brother ahead of him. He's like, well, we'll meet within a day or two, so I'll send the gifts ahead and maybe they'll see the gifts and he'll have some grace with me and some forgiveness on me. And so it gets to the night before as they're closing in and Jacob sends his wives and their kids before him and Jacob finds himself alone, by himself. And he starts talking to God. We see this in chapter 32. And what's interesting is because in this moment, again, his story is taking a sharp turn. He doesn't know what's about to happen. As far as Jacob knows, him and his family are about to die. Now, this is not a good story, okay? This was not the story that God had said, I will be with you, I will keep you, because now the story is, I'm going to die. So where is your faithfulness in this, Lord? In fact, I've been cheated out of my life for 20 years now, and now I'm going to die. So I would honestly look at this and be like, God, where is this faithfulness? Where is that promise? This is what Jacob does, however, and it's beautiful. You see, in this moment, he turns to the promise that God had made, and he sandwiches his worry right in between this. I'm going to read this. It's not going to be on the screen, but it's from Genesis chapter 32. As Jacob is there, it says, and Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I may do you good. He starts out reminding himself and stating, God, you have promised to do me good. And then he lists out his word, I might die, and then he finishes it like this, but you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. As Jacob's life seems to be hanging on the line and he's not sure what's going to happen, his response is to turn and take God exactly at his word and to sandwich all of his worries right within the promise of God. Earlier this week, I woke up about 2 in the morning, and I normally sleep pretty well, but I woke up at 2 in the morning, I was just overwhelmed with fear and anxiety. That's not normal for me. And I lay there for about 30 minutes and was like trying to just rationalize it. I was like, it's okay, everything's good. You don't have anything to be afraid of, Foster. You don't have anything to be anxious about. God is good. Lay there for about 30, 45 minutes. It wouldn't go away. I can feel that feeling if you've ever had it. Your heart is just like swelling and beating, and you can kind of feel it coming up your neck and in the back of your head. And no matter what you do, everything just seems to press in on you. And I ended up sitting up in my bed. I was like, it's at this point 3 in the morning. I don't know what to do. And I just started praying. I was like, that's the only thing I know how to do at this point is, God, I'm just going to pray. And I just started praying. I was like, God, I know that you're a good God. I know that you have a plan for this. I know that you're working in this. I believe that you led me here. I don't see it, God. And I need you to calm my heart right now because my heart is deceitful and my heart is betraying me in this moment because I'm so overwhelmed with fear. And I used to tell students when I do camps, I was like, do you know why God tells us so often in the Bible not to be afraid? It's because he knows that we will and he expects us to be. If I didn't expect a 3-year-old to run into traffic because they have no idea, I wouldn't tell them don't play in traffic, right? But because I know that they're not going to think, I'm expecting them to do something where they might get hurt, I'm going to tell them don't do something that's going to get you hurt. Same thing for God. God expects us to be afraid. That's why he says, hey, don't be afraid. Here's why. There was a show I watched years ago, and I really enjoyed it, and the main character in this show is having a crisis, and he's freaking out, and he's overwhelmed, and he has a mentor that looks at him, and he says, hey, in this moment, I need you to focus, and here's why, because I know you can't do this, and you don't have any faith in yourself. I need you to have faith in the me that believes in you. And then when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's a cool line. And years ago, God kind of showed me, I was like, God, that is so much my faith right now, is God is saying, Foster, I know that this is overwhelming. I don't need you to fix it or to believe that you can get through it. I need you to believe in me who has made you and who did good with you and who is overseeing this. I don't need you to believe in yourself at all right now, Foster. I need you to believe in the me that is doing good works in you. And I think that's what Jacob was doing when he was couching this prayer right there, is he was saying, God, I don't see how this is going to end well because I'm about to die for my brother, but I am trusting you who made me and who promised good to me and who's doing good to me. And then we have one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. We see this in Genesis 32. Genesis 32. We see this. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Now, you may have heard this verse many times. It's a very famous passage right here where Jacob's left alone on this hilltop. He's sent his family ahead of him, and he wrestles with this man until the breaking of the day. And we find out later in this passage that this man is actually the Lord himself that Jacob is wrestling with. So that's like mind blowing right there, like, period. Like, when I get to heaven, I'll be like, Jacob, show me your bicep, bro. Because what else happens is the man doesn't overpower Jacob, which I think we're pretty clear that's God. He's limiting himself. Otherwise, he would just destroy him. And he kind of shows it. He makes a cheap move, pops his hip out of socket. But Jacob is left alone, uncertain what's going to happen with his life. He reminds himself of the promises of God. He clings to that. And then the Lord shows up, and Jacob's response is this. He starts to wrestle with the Lord. And so I want to ask this question because I think for so long I wrestled with it, and I still do, is how do we respond when we're alone in a broken story? I'll be honest, my response most often is not pretty. I do the ugly cry kind of deal. It's like, Lord, thank you, no one else is seeing this. I'm overwhelmed. I'm scared. God, you've abandoned me. God, I don't know what to do. God. I need help. Very rarely is my response, you know what, God, I'm going to wrestle with you and cling to you and not do anything else because you've promised that you're a good God. And this is what we see Jacob do. We see this in the next couple verses. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then the man said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. See, Jacob was clinging with a death grip to the Lord and saying, I refuse to let you go, Lord, until you bless me, because you promised you would bless me. I will not let go. I will not quit, because I believe that you can and will keep your word. And so therefore, if you want this to end, you got to follow through on your word, because I believe you can, and I believe you will. And we see this beautiful moment. God blesses Jacob. He changes his name. He says, you're now Israel, which is a play on words. And it's one who is that strove with God. He wrestled with God and man. This beautiful change in Jacob's life right there. But we see that what happened was Jacob clung to the Lord's promises more than anything else. And this moment goes on to characterize a lot of his life. You see, we fast forward, Jacob has more kids, everything goes well with Esau, and he has this boy named Joseph, and we know the story of Joseph. He's Jacob's favorite. Jacob commits the same sin that his father did. He plays favorites, and so Joseph is the favorite. Joseph gets in trouble with his brothers. Joseph is sold into slavery, and he is sent to Egypt. And then the famine comes. And so Jacob's story, remember the promise that God said was, I will be your God, I will lead you, I will give you land, and I will bless you. And now he's been a nomad for most of his life. His favorite son has been dead to him at this point, okay? And now he's living in famine and having to leave the land that God said I would take you to. Man, God followed through on all those promises. And we see this. We know the story of Jacob. It's a beautiful redemption story. Jacob and his family end up coming to Egypt. There's food there. They meet Joseph, and Joseph brings Jacob to Pharaoh. And I want you to see Jacob's own account of his life, because he says this to Pharaoh in Genesis 47, it'll be on the screen. It says this, and Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the years of my life. By Jacob's own account, his life has been pretty terrible. I've walked with the Lord promised good to me, he promised to bless me, but few and evil has been my life. That's the kind of story I've had here. My son was dead to me for 20 years. That's how long Joseph was gone. 20 years. And then you find out after 20 years, not only is he alive, but your other sons all lied to you for 20 years that they sold your son into slavery. I mean, what a broken dynamic right there. Few and evil have been the years of my life. In many ways, Jacob's life looked vastly different from what anyone might think that God's original promise had in store for Jacob. He lost his family. He was cheated out of his bride. He feared for his life most of his life. He lost his son for 20 years. And yet his response through all of that, and this is where we're going with this, Jacob's response was continued faith and worship the entire time. We see this just a few verses later. It says this in chapter 47, 29. When the time drew near that Israel must die, Israel being Jacob, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if now I found favor in your sight, don't bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in the burying place, because Jacob was confident that God would keep his word to bring their family to that land again. He said, this is how confident I am, Joseph. My life has been dismal, few and evil and terrible, but I do believe that God will keep his promises. And so when I die, you're going to take me back to the place where our family will be again one day. That's how confident I am of that, Joseph. And then he does this, verse 31, then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. And if you remember from Hebrews 11 earlier, we have this thing where it says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed the sons of Joseph and then bowed himself upon the head of his staff. Head of his staff and head of his bed are the same thing. It's a slight difference in word choice, but this means the same thing. What this is, I was trying to think of a good way to depict this. Imagine a kid, okay, a 6-year-old kid, and you come in, and my mom used to do this with me, and okay, we're going to have prayer time. And what does that kid typically do? They go like this, here's the head of the bed, boom. They bow themselves over the head of the bed. Bowing himself over the head of the staff was the same thing. The staff was a symbol of power and security. And so Jacob, is bowing himself over this staff, bowing himself where he is. And after having an evil and difficult life, guess what he does? He worships God. Man, that is pure beauty. As I was preparing this and reading through, I was like, Lord, I hope that one day I can be as faithful as that, because my faith is not there. When my days are few and evil in the short period of time, and I've lived a good life, I know that. But in those moments where they are, my reaction is not, God, you will absolutely keep all your promises, and I will praise you. My reaction is, God, why have you failed me? Why have you failed my story? Why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? In his final moments, Jacob said this to his son. He said, "Then Israel said to Joseph, 'Behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers.'" And after all he had encountered, I think we have to ask, what would cause a man like Jacob in a story like that to continue being faithful to God? The story did not go at all as he'd hoped or he imagined from that promise. So what would cause a man like Jacob to be faithful? I think he had actually seen the Lord. You see, there are over 7,000 promises in Scripture directly from God to mankind. There's about 9,000 promises total in Scripture, but about 7,000, it's 7,400 and something, are directly from God to humanity. I promise this. Some of them are like this. I will never leave you or forsake you. I will turn your ashes to beauty. That's a beautiful one. I will be with you. I have plans for you for welfare and a future. I will be your God. I will lead you. I will forgive you. Beautiful promises. And my question today as we wrap up is when the story starts to stray, when it's not what we imagined, when the promise doesn't look like we imagined it being, what is our response? That's a lot of promises for God to make. Maybe he can't keep them. Do we abandon hope? Do we say, because it's been difficult, because it's been dark, and please hear me on this, I wrestle a lot with this part of the message because I don't want to speak into someone's pain. I know a number of y'all have gone through very difficult things I have never experienced. I can't put myself in those shoes. And so I'm not telling you need to get over your problems. You just need to abandon it and seek Jesus and everything's good. No, because there is legit pain. There is heartache. There is hurt. It's also why God promised to be a comforter. He wouldn't need to comfort us if he didn't know there was real pain. But in those moments when the promise and the story doesn't go, do we abandon hope? That is too good to be true. God isn't really doing anything for me. Do we rage against God? That's my response, I'll be honest. How dare God allow this to happen to me? How dare he allow our family to go over there? How dare he allow our story to take that turn? How dare he allow them to be taken from us? How dare he allow the world to be overturned? How dare he? So much over the past 2 years, I felt God gently pushing me towards Job, and I fully understand Job now. I spoke of things I did not understand. Things too wonderful for me. Or maybe our response is like Jacob, and we wrestle. See, I think it's easy to look at that story and see that it's a bad thing. Oh, don't wrestle with the Lord. No. The wrestle was beautiful. For 2 years of my story, when I moved back from Georgia, I had the most spiritual encounter ever with God for 2.5 years doing ministry, moved home, and shortly after moving home, God went dead silent. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't speak to me. I've shared this story multiple times in messages, but it's such a pivotal part of my life. I think it bears repeating. Is during that time, the Lord did not speak to me once. He didn't say, Foster, go there. Foster, go to that school. Foster, become a youth pastor. Foster, anything like that. And I went to my mentors, the people that I loved most, and I said, God will not talk to me. And if I can paint a picture of what that looked like in my life at that time, it was as if I looked around and was in a desert at night. It's not pitch black, it's just like twilight everywhere. And there's nothing as far as you can see except for dead dust. And I can see a small cloud. That's God. Now, this isn't a vision. Please understand me on that, okay? This is just a depiction. And it was like every time that I was in this place, I would look and I knew the cloud was where God was leading. I was like, God, I will not stop because you promised good to me. You promised to me, my God, you promised to lead me. And so I'm going to stand right here. And if you don't like it, you can do something about it because I am not going away. Now, I wish I could tell you it was that pretty all the time. A lot more often it was fetal position or laying in bed at night, just weeping like, God, why won't you talk to me? But I will tell you this, that 2 years of God not saying a word to me is to this day the most beautiful story in my life. I refuse to give up. I refuse to not seek God. My story is not what I thought it'd be. It's not pretty in some areas like I thought it would be, but man, it's far better than I could have imagined. And that's the story of the gospel. This God who said, I promise I will fix the story. I will make things right. I will pay the penalty. And he sent his son Jesus to die for you and for me. That's the God who makes these promises. And as we leave today, this is the one thing I want to leave you with is this, okay? Faithfulness. The faithfulness of Jacob is an active commitment, not a passive label to take God at his word. Faithfulness is not something you just are. A spouse isn't just faithful by they have a badge, boom. A spouse is faithful because every day they make the conscious choice to choose their spouse over everyone else. That's why a spouse is faithful. When you get married, you don't get some kind of cool title that prevents you from infidelity. Like, boom, there you go, you're faithful now. No. Every single day, you make a commitment to be faithful. And the same is true with our faith, is that faithfulness, as we see with Jacob, as we look at Jacob's life, Jacob didn't just go through life passively like, oh, God's good. No, Jacob wrestled with God and said, God, this is bad. I don't understand. But he made an active choice every single time that as bad as this is, God, I will take you at your word. You promised good for me. You said you have a plan. I'll believe it. And sometimes that plan doesn't look good in the moment. But faithfulness means even when it's dark, even when it's difficult, even when things are not going how we imagine, we say, all right, God, I believe what you said, and I believe that you will follow through on it. And so I'm going to act in a way that shows that. And then faithfulness leads into obedience. I'm going to obey you because I do believe that you have good for me. Even though things aren't good right now, I will obey because I believe that you are a good God worth my obedience. That's the beauty of the gospel. Guys, I'm so excited to be part of this church. I'm excited to get to be part of our church family, serving our community. I love getting to be here with you guys, getting to do ministry with you. I know that Pastor Brian, Pastor Robert, Pastor Steve, and myself, we are all constantly praying for each of you and for our community. I would love to talk with you more at the end of this message. I'll be out in the foyer. I'd love to just get to say hey and meet you. If you would like to pray with someone, I understand a message like this can sometimes bring up some difficult seasons. We would love to talk and pray with you. We'll have some people down here. I'll be out there. If you're tuning in online, we have a special prayer spot that you can go to, churchsouthlake.com/prayer, where we have somebody waiting that would love to talk with you and pray with you. So guys, I hope you have a great week. I'm so very grateful for each of you. And I hope that you'll grow with me, because I'm not at that point yet. But that all of us as a community will make the choice to take God at his word. God bless. We'll see you next week.